الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. In continuing discussing the book بلوغ المرام من أدلة الأحكام by Al-Hafiz Ibn Al-Hajj Al-Asqalani rahimahullah, and we'll be discussing today Kitab al-Tahara, and we're discussing the discussion where he discussed concerning adab qada al-haja, so those mannerism and conduct that one should observe in fulfilling the call of nature. So we'll be discussing two hadith in this session, the first hadith of Ibn Mas'ud and the second hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. Aywa.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Hadith 88, narrated Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam went out to answer the call of nature and asked me to bring 3 stones. I found 2 stones but did not find a third one, so I took a dried piece of dung and brought it to him. He took the 2 stones and threw away the dung and said, "This is a filthy thing." Reported by Al-Bukhari. Ahmad and Ad-Daraqutni had the addition, "Bring me something other than dung." Hadith 89, narrated Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam forbade us to use a bone or dung for istinja, cleaning the private parts, and said, "These 2 things do not purify." Reported by Ad-Daraqutni, who graded it Sahih, authentic.
So these are the 2 hadith that we'll be discussing inshallah in this session bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So as for the first hadith, the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, where the author rahimahullah, he mentioned, and Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu قال أتى النبي عليه السلام غائط فأمرني أن آتيه بثلاثة أحجار فوجدت حجرين ولم أجد ثالثا فأتيته بورثة فأخذهما فألقى الورثة وقال هذا ركس أخرجه البخاري. زاد أحمد ودارقطني ائتني بغيرها. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى أن يستنجى بعظم أو ورث وقال إنهما لا يطهران. رواه دارقطني وصححه. So these are the 2 hadith that have been mentioned by the author rahimahullah in the discussion regarding matters pertaining to qada al-haja. So as for the first hadith that he mentioned, the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, so first we go to that hadith and then we go to the second hadith. So as for the first hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, then they have mentioned regarding concerning that as for the sources of this hadith, so discuss each hadith separately. Each hadith separately. For first, we'll discuss the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. Then after, we'll discuss the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhuma. So as for the first hadith that have been mentioned here, that the author mentioned the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. So as for this particular hadith, that as for the sources that have been mentioned regarding concerning this particular hadith, as the author mentioned the hadith, he says akhrajahu al-Bukhari. Then he mentioned wazad Ahmad, meaning that there's additional word into the hadith that have been mentioned by Ahmad and also Daraqutni, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned ائتني بغيرها, so if you bring me something to replace this or bring something other than this. As for the first part of the hadith, where that mentioned that رواه Bukhari, قال, this hadith have been collected by Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah in his Sahih, also Ahmad with this additional information, An-Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Tahawi, and others. So this hadith have been mentioned by some of the sources that have been mentioned. So so that's concerning that particular hadith. So the hadith here mentioned, that have been mentioned, as we stated, the hadith, it is in the Al-Bukhari and others. As for Sheikh Fahl, that when he mentioned this hadith, that the source that he stated for this hadith, that he mentioned that the hadith in the Ahmad, Bukhari, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Khuzaymah, and also Al-Bayhaqi. So you have different, so the hadith have been narrated by many. So we said overall the hadith can be found with Bukhari, Ahmad, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Khuzaymah, Daraqutni. Also the hadith can be found with Tahawi and others. Then the hadith also, so that's concerned the first section of hadith. As for there's an additional wording that have been mentioned, that the author rahimahullah, he states that the Prophet Islam says, bring other than this or replace this. That they mentioned that additional wording is collected by Ahmad and also them Ahmad and Daraqutni. So as for that additional wording that have been mentioned here, that there's some discussion regarding the ulama regarding its authenticity. So a discussion regarding the authenticity of that additional wording that they mentioned regarding concern that additional wording regarding that of those who order to be that you find that Sheikh Samir Zahiri, that Zuhairi he mentioned regarding concerning that when he's checked, he mentioned that he state regarding concerning that additional wording that he mentioned that قال ولف للدارقطني, that wording that had been mentioned, additional wording is with Daraqutni. وأما لف, that wording of is in Daraqutni, where they mentioned that it says that ائتني بغيرها, that's the wording of Daraqutni, that additional wording. As for the wording that's in the Ahmad that they mentioned here, ائتني بحجر, that he mentioned a second wording of that is found with Ahmad in his Musnad, ائتني بحجر, that for you to bring a hajar, to bring an additional stone and replace it with this thing. So he mentioned that as for they mentioned وهي زيادة صحيحة زيادة صحيحة, that's what he mentioned as Zuhair rahimahullah ta'ala, Sheikh Samir, not sure if he's dead or alive. Allah, so Sheikh Zuhair rahimahullah, Hafid Zuhairi, that he mentions that it is authentic. So as for that particular wording, that you'll find a discussion between the ulama. So with that particular wording, you'll find a discussion between some of the ulama regarding its being authentic or not. So as for that additional wording, that it is stated here they mention الزيادة رواه أحمد الدارقطني من طريق معمر عن أبي إسحاق عن علقمة ابن قيس عن ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه وفي آخره النبي عليه السلام, that he mentioned what has been mentioned. قال رجاله ثقات أثبات, as mentioned by some of the ulama regarding this particular wording. Then they mentioned that some of the ulama have authenticated it, that Ad-Daraqutni said no, Hasan. Then they mentioned وهذه الزيادة حسن زاده معمر وافقه عليه أبو شيبة إبراهيم ibn Uthman والراجع الانقطاع. So a discussion between some of the ulama regarding is this particular additional wording, is it authentic or not? Some hold it to be authentic, while others hold it not to be authentic. We discussed that there's a discussion regarding concerning that أن قيل أن أبا إسحاق لم يسمع من علقمة. So there's a discussion regarding, did Abu Ishaq, one of the narrators, Abu Ishaq, did he hear from Alqamah? So those who hold, where some hold that there is, and some hold that there is not, that the ulama, they have a discussion on this matter. So some hold to be mursal, where others hold it where they said no, there's inqita, al-mursal, so there's inqita in the isnad, and others who hold that it is authentic. So you have that discussion regarding this additional wording. So khilaf between the ulama on that additional wording on this hadith. So as for the next matter, so the hadith is authentic with additional wording. There's some khilaf between the ulama, those who hold it to be authentic. As we mentioned, a discussion regarding Abu Ishaq, did he hear from Alqamah? Those who affirm this and those who say that's not the case. So based upon this, that those who are hold it to be that's confirmed sama, they hold it to be they hold it to be authentic, and those who hold it as an inqita, then they hold it that to be da'if. Allahu alam. So they mentioned regarding concern that, as for the second matter, regarding the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, so as for Ibn Mas'ud, as mentioned, it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud ibn Ghafil ibn Habib al-Dhuhali. So it's Abdullah ibn Mas'ud ibn Ghafil ibn Habib al-Dhuhali. And mentioned that, كان من الأوائل of those of the early ones to accept Islam. So they mentioned كان سادس رجل في الإسلام. That is mentioned that he was the sixth of those men to enter Islam. So Abdul Mas'ud is of the early ones who have accepted Islam. And also he made al-Hijrah to Habasha. And also he was involved in various of the battles, amongst them Al-Badr, and also the Mashahid, and also the battles, the different battles that took place after Al-Badr. So Ibn Mas'ud, one of those who participated in many of the battles with the Prophet ﷺ. And also that Ibn Mas'ud, that also said to be of those who also gave service to the Prophet ﷺ, personal service, where we assist the Prophet ﷺ regarding helping him regarding personal matters. Regarding concern to know that help him with certain matters. That so they mentioned that that even was praised to be that he was very of those who was praised to be of those of the Sahaba that his samt wal hadi was very close to that of the Prophet ﷺ. He was very so it resembles that of the Prophet ﷺ regarding his conduct and behavior and how he functioned. Also it is mentioned that tawalla al-qada, that he was appointed as qada wal bayt al-mal fil Kufa, that he was the one that was responsible for being the qadi, and also in Kufa, and also he was responsible for Bayt al-Mal, so for the general public treasury, he was responsible for this matter. And this was during the time of Umar ibn Khattab, in the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, and also in a portion of the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan. So he served in that position, that role, as a qadi, and also the one in charge of the Bayt al-Mal during the time of Umar, and also he continued that role in a portion of the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu. Then Uthman ibn Affan, that he asked him to return back to Medina. So he was placed in these roles in Kufa. Then Uthman ibn Affan asked him to return back to Al-Medina, where he died in Medina. عليه رحمة الله ورضي الله تعالى عنه. So he died, and they mentioned إثنتين وثلاثين, that he died in the year, in the 32nd year of the Hijrah. He died in Medina. And Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, of those who have hadith that is found in Kutub al-Sitta and many books of hadith. So he has a hadith in Kutub al-Sitta and other books of hadith. So as for the hadith itself, as for what it contains, the ahkam of this particular hadith, that as for this particular hadith, that of the ahkam that can be taken from the hadith, that it discussed concerning the hadith is the discuss concerning the mawdu of the topic regarding istinja, performing istinja bil ahjar, that the permissibility for one to perform, to clean off oneself, istinja, clean off oneself, but with the use of ahjar, with the use of stone and something similar. That I mentioned that, but with 3 stones or more. As the hadith, it mentioned regarding concerning that, so the hadith indicated that the Prophet mentioned that ataytuhu bi thalathati ahjar, that he commanded me, amrani an atiyahu, that he commanded, instructed him for him to bring 3 stones. So it mentioned regarding concerning that the hadith is a discuss this particular matter, where we have somewhat discussed some of these matters in previous hadith. So in the hadith of Salman al-Farisi, that this matter was somewhat discussed. This hadith also to elaborate further on this topic. So in discussing further on this particular topic, that of these masail that relates to this hadith, what can be said concerning that the amount of stones to be used in cleaning of oneself. So if one was to use stones, how many stones is required to be used? That the ulama, they of the view of the ulama, that they take the position that a khilaf between ulama, that a person has to use 3 or more, not less. So 3 or more stones, that is to be used. And of the ulama who may say أنه يشترط, that of those who that they make a conditional that a person have to use 3 or more stones. And where I mentioned that 3 or more to clean off oneself, as mentioned in the hadith, that he asked, so less than 3 is not sufficient. The person have to use 3 or more stones. And that's the position taken by Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad, Ishaq, Abi Thawr, also Ibn Hazm, Al-Zahiri, Ibn Mundhir, and others who take the position that 3 or more is required. Less than this is not sufficient. And for the person to clean himself, he has to use 3 or more stone as stipulated in the hadith. So I mentioned, as we have discussed before, that 3 or more, even if it's a large stone, as we mentioned before, that if we was to use 3 separate sides, if it's a large stone, then 3 separate sides, 3 different separate sides of the stones, of that stone can be used if it's a large stone. But 3 wipes at least, or 3 sides of the stone, or 3 stones have to be used. And I mentioned that now this is the hadith I've been stipulated in this hadith and also in other hadith. So many hadith also stipulate 3. The hadith of Salman that we had discussed before, where the Prophet mentioned that an yastanji bi aqal min thalatha ahjar. And other hadith of that nature. And other hadith. So they mentioned concerning hadith also of Abu Hurairah anhu in the Ashabu Sunan illa at-Tirmidhi, where the hadith mentioned, the hadith in the Ahmad, Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, where the Prophet alayhi salam, he mentioned the hadith, كان يأمر بثلاث أحجار وينهى عن ورث so he mentioned regarding concerning the hadith, وكان يأمر بثلاث أحجار. So this hadith mentioned the Prophet alayhi salam, the shahid, that he used to forbid the use of, that he used to command, instruct that 3 stones be used. And other hadith of this nature. Then also the hadith of Aisha Mu'mineen, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, إِذَا ذَهَبَ أَحَدُكُمْ إِلَى الْغَائِطِ. If any of you go to the place to relieve himself, فَلْيَذْهَبْ مَعَهُ, then he should go along with him, بِثَلَاثَةِ أَحْجَارٍ. He should take with him 3 stones. يَسْتَطِيبْ بِهِنْ, that he is able to clean himself with these. فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَجْزِي عَنْهُ, as فَإِنَّهَا تَجْزِي عَنْهُ, as this will be sufficient for him. This would be sufficient for him. And in that hadith, it is mentioned in the Ahmad, Abu Dawood, and Nasa'i, and Daraqutni fi as-Sunan, wa isnaduhu, of the ulama who all hadith to be sahih. So you have many other hadith of this nature, where the Prophet ﷺ kind of somewhat that commanded, instructed, that if one choose to use stone, then one has to use 3 stones, as the wording of those ahadith. That's the first opinion of the ulama. So that's concerning of the ulama who take that opinion regarding 3 or more stones are required. There's a second opinion on this matter, where that's the view that is taken by Imam Abu Hanifa, alayhi rahmatullah, and also Imam Malik, also of that view, and also it is the view that is said to be the view of Dawood al-Zahiri. That's the view that is taken by Dawood al-Zahiri, alayhi rahmatullah, where they mention in this hadith that it states in this particular hadith where their position is based upon, in this hadith also they mention, the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith they mention that ataytuhu bi waratha, that waratha, where the Prophet ﷺ that he came with 2 stones and dry dung, and the Prophet ﷺ that they mentioned, you know, he somewhat they mentioned that he asked for a 3rd. So they mentioned that they all concerned that this view, they hold that anything that cleanse the person, then that is what is required. So clean the person able to can clean himself, then this is what we require. It is not required that 3 or is not a requirement, but the requirement is that the person is able to can clean himself, whether it is with 3 or less ahjar, whether with 3 more or less. So for them that they see the maqsood, the objective is for the person izalat al-najasa wal inqa, that the person able to can clean himself, and the objective is to removal of the impurity whether this is achieved by 3 or more or less. So that's the view of, as we mentioned, Imam Abu Hanifa wa Imam Malik alayhim rahmatullah and others. As for al-qawl al-raji' on this matter, qawl al-jumhur. So regarding of the view, which is the first opinion. So the first opinion, as that is in line with the hadith. As that is in line with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, were instructed in various hadith that one to use 3 or more. As for those who mention 3 or more, that opinion, they also added the person required to use more than 3 stones, that he should try to use an odd number. So 3, or he goes up to 5 or 7. So they prefer that the person use an odd number, and this is taken by other hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he mentioned regarding concerning hadith in Al-Bukhari, the hadith of min hadith Abi Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, we mentioned man istajmar falyuthir. Man istajmar, that the one who wish to use stones and to clean himself, then a person should use an odd number. So they mentioned that odd number would be 3 or more. The same hadith, man istajmar falyuthir, is used also by those who say 2, 3 or less is acquired, because I mentioned man istajmar falyuthir. So 1 is a number, an odd number. So for them they use these, but overall that is a hadith is not to stipulate a number, just stating that if one is to use stones, then should be in an odd number, the least 3 stones. But it could increase to, it could be increased, but has to be done in an odd number method. So that's concerning that particular discussion on that matter. The second matter in this discussion, as we somewhat discussed before concerning istinja bighayri hijara, is a person allowed to use other than stones? The hadith stipulate the Prophet asked for stones and didn't ask for something else in most of the hadith. They mentioned man istajmar falyuthir. So most hadith mention regarding cleaning of oneself with other than water, the Prophet ﷺ, that he will ask for stones. So is it restricted to stones, or other than stones can be used? On this matter, you find that even again concerning of the ulama who take the position that they adam al-ishtirat al-ahjar, that those who mention that in performing the act of istinja, it is not a requirement that a person has to use stone. So anything which is similar. So as we had discussed before, that so other things can be used that will fulfill the same objective of clean of the person. So they mentioned that, as we mentioned, that the person might use mindil, it's a paper, or other things that may be used, that if these things are used, also it serves the same purpose, so they are allowed. And that's the view that is taken by Jumhur of the ulama regarding other than stones can be used. This is outside of water, so other than water. So we're not discussing water, we're discussing other than water. Is stone the only thing that one should stick with? Based upon most of the hadith, Jumhur of the ulama says no, that they hold that anything which can be used that fulfill that objective, then other than stone can be used. So that's the call of Jumhur of the ulama, the Hanafiya, the Malikiyya, the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila. So and that's qawl sahih, and that's the more correct view. There's a second opinion taken by some of the Ibn Hazm and some of the Hanabila and others who hold that la yujzi illa al-ma aw ahjar. So the ulama who take the position regarding the person cleaning of himself after the call of nature, that the person only can use either water or ahjar. As I mentioned, these are the things that are mentioned in the hadith. So regarding what the Prophet ﷺ have instructed as things to be used, or what have been mentioned by way of text, the person only use water, or the person use ahjar, because these are the things that are mentioned in the by way of text. So that's concerning that, or I mentioned anything that is from the earth, or jins al-ard. So that's the view taken by the matter of Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri. They owe to the text, as what has been mentioned only by the text, and also some of the Hanabila are inclined towards that view, and some of the Malikiyya. But overall, qawl al-jumhur is the correct opinion. So in this matter, that qawl al-jumhur is the correct opinion. Another matter that is discussed regarding this hadith حكم ورث حيوانات ورث حيوانات that معقول اللحم animals that we are allowed to consume of their meat, to eat of their meat, can we use their dung to clean ourselves? What's concerned the hukum of their dung? So over regarding the hukum of their dung, regarding concern that these animals regarding their dung, their waste, can those, they said, animals that we eat of their meat, animal that we consume of their meat. What's the rule regarding their dung? On this matter, you find a khilaf between the ulama. So of the ulama, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Imam Malik, what is renowned for Imam Malik, and also Ibn Khuzaymah and of some of the ulama of the Shafi'iyah, where they take the position that animal dung that we eat of their meat and also their urine is considered to be tahiratan. So animals that we eat of their meat, that include, for example, camel, cows, goat, sheep, as examples of those animals that their meat, concerning that their dung and also their urine, it is tahir. It is tahir. Tahiratan. So both so that's concerning qawl of Ahmed, Imam Malik, and others who of this opinion. And I mentioned also Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, is more kind of somewhat behind this view also. He's also of those who's behind who is of this as view, and somewhat we have discussed this matter, into this matter before. The second opinion that as for the dung of these animals that we eat of their meat and their urine, that they see it as najas, that it is najas. So their dung and their urine, with of the ulama, or some of the ulama who take it that it is najas. And of those who are of this opinion, Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Abi Hanifa and also Imam Ash-Shafi'i. So for Imam al-Arba, two are inclined towards it being pure, and two are inclined towards it not being pure, which is the dung of animals that we eat of their meat. So that's concerning that matter. Then they discuss the next matter. As we have discussed, so the other thing we have discussed, so of the other thing from this hadith, of the benefit from this hadith, it indicates, and the hadith of Salman and other hadith, that it indicate that there are certain things that we are not to use to clean ourselves. So there's things that are not allowed for us to clean ourselves with these items, with these things. So from this hadith, it mentioned warth, which is concerning the dung of the animal. And as we had mentioned before, that the reason, the hikmah, the reason based upon hadith, that the dung of these animals, that is somewhat also that the food of the jinn. They are animals. So we have discussed that matter prior. Also of those things that are not allowed to use to clean of ourselves, as we discussed in the hadith of Salman also, adham, that bones also not to be used. Third of those things, that anything muhtaram, so anything that is said to be things that is said to be respected. So of those things that will be in that list of things that are respected and to be honored, for example, Islamic material, Islamic books that have pages, the page of those or magazines or pamphlets or leaflet. So anything that is said to be muhtaram, things that are said to be that are honored, respected, then one should not use those things to clean up themselves, especially those things that have written material, those things that have books, leaves, pages that have written things on them, with then they're not to be used. And as we mentioned, using some of those things regarding to clean up oneself could be an act of kufr. That person was to use a page of the mushaf, then it's an act of kufr. Yadha billah. So generally concerned, so a general thing regarding, like, in today magazines, newspapers, if they are magazines that contain things of respected names, then they are not to be used. Concern name, concern Abdullah, maybe mention that magazine, and the name of Allah, then cannot be used. Also, third or fourth of those things, ta'am. Another of those things that cannot be used, ta'am. So food cannot be used as something to a person to clean himself with. So a person use a loaf of bread a bread slice to clean themselves, then that's not proper. Then that is not to be done. And also they add concerning of those things, things that are said to be najasat. So things that are said to be impure. So things that are said to be impure, then also one is not to use of things that are said to be impure. So that's concerning what can be taken and extracted from this particular hadith of Abdullah bin Mas'ud Ratala anhu. As for the next hadith, so they mention innaha riks, yani riks najas. So riks najas. They mention some narration mention. So they mention that some mention riks, some mention rids, bit jim. So you have that khilaf between the ulama, but riks, as he mentioned here, so that's concerning this particular hadith, meaning thing which is najasa, things of that it is impure. So as for the next hadith that is mentioned, so we have ended that hadith regarding ahkam relating to the use of dung, regarding purifying of oneself, that one is not to use this, as the Prophet ﷺ that he refused to use this, and he asked for something to be as the khilaf, that something to replace it. The next hadith to be discussed, the hadith of, and I mentioned here, an Abi Hurairah Rata'ala anhu, أن رسول الله عليه السلام نهى أن يستنجى بعظم وروث وقال إنهما لا يطهران. So that's the hadith that they mentioned رواه الدارقطني وصححه. So it's the next hadith that I mentioned regarding the topic of things of what cannot, regarding concerning these objects, as we discussed concerning al-adam, and also in particular concerning the dung of animal, that was the hukum regarding it, that they consider to be, as I mentioned, innahuma la yutahhiran, that they are not something to use to purify or to clean oneself. They mentioned regarding concerning that this hadith, the first, we have discussed matter regarding the sahabi, who's Abu Hurairah Rata'ala anhu. As for the next matter regarding this hadith is takhrij of the hadith. So as for this hadith, that takhrij of the hadith, that Sheikh Al-Fahl, so we mentioned several sources. So since we said so as for Sheikh Al-Fahl in his check of the book Bulugh Maram, when he mentioned this particular hadith, that the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, that he mentioned isnaduhu da'if. So he all the hadith to be da'if. So he mentioned that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah rawahu Daraqutni wa sahhahu, that Daraqutni authenticate the hadith. So he mentioned that of those who have done checking of the book Bulugh Maram, they mentioned, as we mentioned here, Sheikh Fahl, he mentioned isnaduhu da'if. Then he mentioned the reason. فيه حسن ibn فرات قزاز وهو صدوق يهم وسلمة ibn Raja. So you have two reasons. One person called Hassan, another called Salama ibn Raja. هو صدوق يغرب. Then he mentioned, so he mentioned that those are the reasons why the hadith is da'if. As for the source of the hadith, he mentioned the hadith in the Ad-Daraqutni, but also Ibn Adi in his book Kamil. So Ibn Adi as a book Kamil, that he discussed al-Ruwat in this particular book. So he mentioned that فقال لا يسع إسناد إليه, that he discussed concerning the hadith is not authentic. So that's concerning one checking of the book Bulugh Maram. Another checking, and this checking is by one of the mashaykh from Yemen, who's Sheikh that Ba'dani. So Sheikh Ba'dani in his checking of Bulugh Maram, so he has two. That he has a checking of Bulugh Maram, and also he has an explanation of Bulugh Maram, as we had mentioned previously, and uses book also to help in discussing this book Bulugh Maram. Then when he mentioned this hadith, hadith number 3, he mentioned da'if. The hadith is da'if. أخرجه الدارقطني. Then he mentioned isnaduhu. Then he mentioned وفي إسنادي in this hadith of Daraqutni Yaqub ibn Humayd. ibn Kasib, وسلم ibn Raja, كلاهما ضعيف. So he mentioned كلاهما ضعيف. So he can somewhat also more inclined toward the hadith being ضعيف. So he also added a third, another person as being one who's questionable in the hadith, which is Yaqub ibn Humayd. So Yaqub ibn Humayd ibn Kasib, that he has now added this person as being of those who are criticized by the hadith, criticized. Then we go to a third checking of the book. Of the book Bulugh Maram. So two so far all the hadith to be da'if. Then we'll go to the one of Sheikh Samir, Dr. Samir, in his checking of the book of Bulugh Maram, that he mentioned the hadith of Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, where he mentioned, number 3, he mentioned Sahih. He all the hadith to be Sahih. Where he mentioned رواه دارقطني وقال إسناده صحيح. So that's the wording of the hadith. That's how when Ibn Hajar rahimah mentioned صحه دارقطني, where he mentioned إسناده صحيح. That's the same as دارقطني. Then he mentioned وفي أصل رد على تعليل ابن أدي للحديث. So that's concerning that. So you find a difference between those who have checked the hadith, the book of Bulugh Maram, their final critique or hukum on this hadith. So he showed that there is a khilaf between the ulama on this particular hadith. This also is a third of another checking of the book, Bulugh Maram, which in this checking of Bulugh Maram, that is done by Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Tahir, and this comes in 3 volumes. So somewhat more detail in his checking. So as for this particular checking, when he mentioned the hadith, that he mentioned the hadith as being 155 in this checking, he mentioned munkar. The hadith is munkar, indicated that it is da'if. Rawahu Daraqutni. وَلَفْظُ, so he said the hadith is narrated by Daraqutni, and the actual wording of Daraqutni, لا يطهران. That hadith mentioned, لا تطهران. So with so the difference, so that's the wording of Daraqutni. So Daraqutni wording is, according to this, in the Daraqutni, it mentioned, لَيْسَ إِنَّهُمَا, so some narration mentioned, إِنَّهُمَا لا يطهران, as mentioned by Ibn Hajar. But the actual wording in Daraqutni should be, لا تطهران. Without innahuma, and also not with a, so also with ta, not with ya. Then he mentioned regarding concerning the hadith that he can somewhat mention that there's over 5 reasons why the hadith is daif. So he mentioned now 5 reasons behind the hadith being discussed or criticized. That he mentioned 1, ghuraba, that there's things that is strange, unusual about the hadith, some which is strange about the hadith, as mentioned by some of the ulama. Thani, the second he mentioned, again, Yaqub ibn Humayd, as being one of the narrators, mutakallim fi. Then he mentioned third, Salama ibn Raja, also of those who, some discussion regarding him as a narrator. The fourth, another narrator whose reason, a third narrator who's Hassan ibn Furrat, also some discussion regarding him, and also that, so then I mentioned munkar hadith, and the hadith he mentioned munkar hadith. That so you have all these criticisms of hadith. So you have various criticisms of hadith, but you find that, as we said, of those who have studied the hadith, those who have come to the conclusion that hadith is daif, and those who come to the conclusion that hadith is sahih. So it's something that indicates something to be looked into further. Something to be looked into further. But the ones who say the hadith is daif, they have given their reasons, which is it revolves around, as we mentioned, certain individual, certain of the ruwat narrating the hadith, which is 3 of them that are under criticism. Also, they mentioned this, that there's also other factors regarding ghurab or infirad. So all those factors, they all hadith to be daif. So that's concerning that particular matter. So this hadith under discussion between the ulama of hadith. So also, as we mentioned, that of the reason why we went through this is to show regarding this particular hadith that you might find that amongst our contemporary mashayikh wa talabatul ilm in hadith, that at times they may differ. So they may differ regarding their final outcome or study of hadith, where some may authenticate hadith, where others may not. But they're all contemporaries, and they're all studying the same hadith. But at times, it may go back to certain factors. And of those factors regarding that or belief concerned that, that how they may, the length or concerned that the extent of their study of the hadith. And also how they may view certain narrators, what's the final outcome on certain narrators, and also certain principles are being followed. So you have of these factors, and also that you might find that at times of the ulama of latter times, at times they may be more, at some time more they might be somewhat more, they might have a more softer approach compared to the ulama of the past. They might have a very more softer approach regarding how they check hadith, where they mention mutasahil, at times maybe a bit more complacent in certain matters, where they put a lot of emphasis on certain matters, but at times maybe need to be looked at in more depth. For overall, you find that difference between the ulama. So I said that also to be aware regarding what the ulama of past have said about hadith. So at times, of those who, of contemporaries, concerning some tullabul ilm, or talabatul ilm, that have looking at hadith, they more revolve around what is said by particular of the mashaykh. And what they give their final judgment become what is taken. When the hadith sometimes, looking outside of, looking beyond, looking at others, who might say the hadith also have, there's factors to be taken into consideration regarding how the hadith is looked at and the outcome that particular mashaykh may have, that others may see things different. So as we said that at times regarding ilm al-hadith, that not to at times give main emphasis on the ulama of contemporary time and ignoring the view of others who are contemporaries and also others of the past. So also regarding concerning that the hadith concerning what can be taken from the hadith. So like Ibn Adi rahimahullah mentioned concerning that, a hadith regarding concerning after some of the narrators mentioned, a hadith afrad wal gharaib. So those are like ways of critiquing of this hadith. So overall, this hadith under lengthy discussion. But as for the hadith concerning the meaning of the hadith is sahih. The meaning of the hadith is sahih. But as for what can be taken from the hadith, then it's sahih regarding its meaning. So as for what can be taken, they mentioned that from the hadith, it shows regarding al-hadith, dalil ala anna istinja bila ahjar. So istinja, meaning concerning the person istinja, clean of oneself. Cleaning of oneself, that istinja bila ahjar, that has to be pure. That these things has to be pure, and things that are not pure, not to be used. So purity of things, and also things that it mentioned that if, as mentioned, al-adam wal-arth, that using of these things, it doesn't make the person pure. It doesn't make the person pure. On that topic, you have a discussion between the ulama regarding if the person was to use of these things, is he considered to be pure? Have he cleaned himself? So the person wants to use these things that are forbidden. He was to use dung and these things that are said to be impure or najis. Is his tahara, clean of himself, is it valid? On this matter, you'll find, concerning that by way of first opinion, which is taken by majority of the ulama, akthar ahli al-ilm, jumhur ulama, amongst them the Hanabila, Shafi'iyah, and others who take the position that the person is considered to be pure if he was to use of these things, as he has cleaned himself, but also so he's considered to be pure even though he used something that he shouldn't have used, but he's have fulfilled what is required of cleaning himself and remove of that filth, but also he's athim, but also he had done something sinful. So yes, they consider him to be pure, but he have used that which he should not have used, but he is considered to be still pure because it removed that filth. But also, he will be said to be sinful. He's said to be sinful, and for the person to make istighfar for what he has done. The second, and in that view, that he doesn't have to redo, clean himself again. So he doesn't have to go through that motion again. Even though he used something which is impure, that shouldn't have been used, but he used it. They say it is valid, it counts, but he's sinful for not using that which, because he used something that he shouldn't have used. But he doesn't have to clean himself again. He doesn't have to go through the procedure again, a second time. As for the second opinion that I mentioned, that yajib and yastanji maratan thani, that the person, if he was to use these things, that is considered to be that what he has used is not valid, and he has to redo the process with that which is suitable and allowed, because he used something that he should not have used. So the act is still for them to be carried out, hasn't been done until he used what is allowed. So that's concerning that. So he has to repeat the act again. So in summary, with them, he has to repeat that act again, even though he used, for example, dung, clean himself. They say to the person, you're in reality, for them, you haven't done anything, because you used something that was not to be used. So you have to repeat that act again by using that which is allowed. By using that which is allowed. And they mention also the person sinful. For yes, also the person sinful for what he did initially, but then the act is to be repeated. That's the qawl that is of the view of some of the ulama. So that inshallah ta'ala, that covers these two hadith regarding of those ahkam that is taken from these two hadith regarding those things that one should not use in purifying of oneself or clean of oneself. So we had mentioned that the asl is water, as mentioned by some, and also other things such as ahjar, stones, and other things that are similar. So we have in today's time tissues or wipes, or the person who wants to use paper, all these things that can be used to clean off oneself. So that inshallah ta'ala we'll end this discussion. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I forgot